What's going on, guys? Welcome to the weekly market breakdown for euro dollar by yours truly for the week commencing, I think the 11th of September or Monday. It'll be Monday, the 12th of September, 2022, of course. So, euro dollar monthly chart, obviously not something I spend much time analyzing when I'm personally just trying to catch intra-session trades, but I think it's always worth just keeping an eye on the higher time frames, and also for some of you who may be taking more of that swing trading approach. But as we know, right, we broke those major monthly lows. After any break of structure on any time frame, what do we expect? We expect a pullback, on that time frame at some point, right? So we have to be in the aware of back of our minds. We may start to see somewhat of a monthly pullback, but of course we could fall for a number of months before that even begins to happen. If we do quickly just change over to a data feed that has a bit more historical data, we can see from about 20 years ago or so, back in the early 2000s, that we are starting to come into these levels of demand over here, right? You can see if we were to draw a zone across, we're starting to see that bullish pressure come in around that parity level. So I do have that in the back of my mind that potentially we may start to see, somewhat of a more deeper pullback potentially, or maybe it's just a short-term pause, right, before we dump lower and then come into these more extreme levels, right? You can almost see if you zoom out on this more sort of quarterly/annual perspective, this looks a bit interesting to me. Potentially we may see, something like this coming into this more sort of strong low, right? If you view it like that, and potentially we could see a bit more of a longer bounce, but that's going to take, years to play out. But just something that's a little bit more interesting. If we take a look at the weekly chart, you can see, right, that just sustained bearish order flow. And this is why I'm not getting too caught up in, yes, we've taken out those lows. Yes, at some point we could have that deeper pullback, but until this more recent, clear bearish order flow starts to shift, I'm not really going to entertain that bullish idea too much just yet. At least I want to see this weekly high go first, and then we may start to see somewhat of more of a sustained pullback, or even it could just be a little bit of a move to come into here before continuing lower. So for now, I'm just going to run with the assumption that we're going to continue to see this bearish order flow, right, with price potentially just coming into this level here and then potentially rolling over. But we are starting to get to those points where now, if you've gotten a short from within here, I wouldn't be trying to swing for the fences to try and catch another 500 to 1,000 pips. It's more just, let's see if we can come into here and come to these lows and then reassess, right? It's kind of more of those quote unquote shorter term movements on those higher time frames there. Daily chart, just realized I'm still on FXCM, so let's go back to forex.com. Some of my drawings should hopefully appear. There we go. A little bit laggy. Fun times in trading view. But yeah, daily chart. We are now obviously, we have been right in a clear bearish trend where we had that last break of structure, clear swing pullback up to that supply range, right, within the previous swing range, and then I had another aggressive break of structure to the downside. But as we've been talking about all of this week in the trade recap and session recap videos, what happened after we got that break of structure? This is something you want to be thinking about. Well, yes, we had a break and close below, but instantly price basically stopped dead in its tracks, right? It didn't really follow through with much momentum. You can start to see all these wicks coming into the market, showing buyer pressure coming in. So we had that break of structure. We had a bit of a shadow pullback. Didn't really come into anything that deep. Didn't come into anything that significant on the daily chart, right? It was just these buy to sell wick supply, which is essentially your 4-hour supply zone, right? And then we continue to sell off. So I personally viewed that as more of a daily internal pullback. So essentially that's more of a 4-hour swing, right? So I didn't view that as a daily swing pullback. And then we broke down below. I think we failed to close below the lows right here. So you can see, again, a lot of bullish pressure come into the market where price for 3 days in a row tried to break below this most recent low. And you can see it failed to close below it. And then we got that bullish retrace candle. So that's what I was saying, right? At that point, there was pretty good confidence that this high was going to go, right? It was struggling to really break the low. And that's why we eventually saw that follow through coming in towards the end of the week. So from a daily chart perspective, this will still be my swing high, right? So essentially playing within this swing range. So the expectation will be that this swing trend will continue, that this is a strong high that took out the low, right? So what we can look for is a pullback into these levels to potentially then look for that swing lower high to form to then target that swing low, right? That will be the expectation. Yes, there is a possibility we could switch bullish, right? There's always that possibility, but we run on the balance probabilities. This is the more likely move that's going to happen, right? So let's kind of draw on our supply zones and see where we could potentially look for price to pull back to during the week ahead. So we obviously have the extreme. This is always going to be the most high probable supply zone to look to trade from, right? because where is it? It's right at the strong high. It's where if the bearish daily trend is going to continue, it would have to continue from the zone, because if the zone fails, then it's very likely we're switching bullish, right? So this is always going to be the highest probability. It also swept liquidity, so that's a pretty nice zone, and it has some nice inducement here, right? So inducement is just where you have liquidity in front of your POI. So because we have a pullback here, right, and we have a high, that means there will be liquidity behind that high. There will be buy stops behind this high. For people who are short, right, if let's say that they've got their stop loss behind this high, right, for them to get triggered out of their stop loss, they're going to have to buy their short position back, right? So that means there's going to be buy stops behind the high. Likewise, there'll be breakout traders looking to buy this high if price breaks it. So there's a ton of buy side liquidity above structural highs in the market, okay? And the theory is that if a lot of big institutional sellers are going to be in this region, they need people to sell into, right? For every order in the market, there needs to be an equal and opposite order. So if you're trying to sell here, you have to have someone who's looking to buy from you, right? And that's why I don't want to get too caught up in this. It's all in the lessons and liquidity concepts. But if we see that inducement in front of a POI where we know there's liquidity, it can increase the probability of this POI holding. So that also adds into what we're going to talk about now when we look at this POI here, because yes, this is a valid supply zone, right? It's a bullish candle that the next candle then closes below its low, right? So it's a valid supply zone. Is it a strong supply zone? Yes, because it went and caused a break of swing structure. So that is a very strong supply zone in terms of what structure it broke. However, it has no inducement in the leg, right? You see how it's one straight push that moves to the downside, right? There was no pullbacks. There's no structural liquidity here. So what that means is because there's no inducement, this can decrease the probability of this POI holding, or decrease the probability of this being the POI that's going to cause this move, right? It may just give a bit of reaction and then push up higher into this level before we get that movement there, okay? So whether a POI has inducement or not doesn't mean that it will fail and that it's not worth trading from. It's just one less tick in the box for increasing the probability of it playing out. And that's why this POI has more confidence, because one, it's at the extreme. Two, it's swept liquidity. And three, it has inducement, right? If we put this here to kind of show you what I mean, right? There's liquidity above or behind this high here, right? So yeah, just kind of wanted to talk through that a little bit. So these would be the main two POIs in which I would be considering that a daily swing lower high could form from, right? They are both, I believe, in the premium. Let's just double check, right? We put on our swing high to swing low, right? Yeah, so they're both in the premium, and they're both decent zones. They both led to a break of structure, right? So let me just kind of take this back a little bit. We have had our, let's just use this daily change of character, okay? Because if we look at the fractal structure, all of these candles broke the previous candle's low, right? So that was the fractal low, price pulls back. And then when we took this low here, let me zoom in a little bit. When we took this fractal low, right, where is our fractal high? Well, when the fractal low breaks, we look back at where the sort of most nearest candle is that failed to break the previous candle's low. And we can see that this candle failed to break the previous candle's low, so that becomes our fractal high, right? Now, why, sometimes when you try and think through those words, it doesn't quite make sense. But if you look at price action, what happens? When price comes up, right? You see how it pulls up, it comes down, right? Then it pulls up, then it comes down, right? This candle fails to break the previous candle's low. And why that's important? Because it means price has pulled back, right? So you get that fractal pullback, and then all of these candles break the previous candle's low. So that's why this is that nearest fractal high at that moment, right? And then price comes up and breaks it. Okay, so we have that bullish change of character there, signaling the start of an internal pullback, right? Now we failed to kind of break above this high, so it does look like a bit of a liquidity sweep so far. But as we look in the lower time frames, I think this will just be a short-term pullback to then come up higher, up into these levels, okay? So yes, we do technically have daily demand here as well. Not the best, but it is valid, right? It caused that fractal break of structure. It caused that change of character. So this will definitely be a level to keep an eye out on. So what, just purely from a daily just a daily chart time frame perspective, like what am I expecting, right? If we think about structure, like I said, we've had the break of swing structure, so we're expecting that swing pullback, right? If we can break and close above that high, we'll get that internal structure shifting bullish, right? And then the expectation will be that the internal structure will stay bullish to facilitate that pullback. So as we come into this level of supply here, right, we can start to look for shorts to anticipate that we're then going to get that swing low high and we're going to take out this low, okay? But it's not confirmed until we get the internal structure shifting back bearish. We need to see a break of this low, right? Because if we get a break of this low, then we have the IBOS, the bearish IBOS, that signals the end of the daily pullback, and then we expect these daily bearish ranges to hold until we take out that swing low, right? But the reason why that's important is because when you have multiple supply levels, like we do here, right? We have this supply level here, and we have this supply level here, and you're not sure which level was going to be the one that's going to cause that swing lower high. Well, we don't need to know, and that's where internal structure will give us that confirmation. So again, if we come down and we come up into this level and we look for shorts, yes, we can anticipate this low goes, but hang on, let me redraw that for a second. Oops. Get the arrow. There we go. But what can happen, right, is it can just be a reaction to facilitate the internal pullback into this strong internal low, right? And then we could push up higher. And then when we come into this level, again, we could look for shorts, but we could get that reaction. And again, we can take shorts from within the supply, anticipating that we're going to take out the daily swing low. But it could be just a pullback into this strong low here, right? And we could push up higher. But on the balance of probabilities coming into that strong high, this is where we can anticipate that we're going to get that bearish IBOS. But it's only once we get that bearish IBOS that we get true structural alignment, that we can confirm the swing pullback is over. And now we expect what? That these strong internal highs are going to hold. So therefore, we expect the bearish internal ranges to hold until we take out that weak swing low. Okay? So that's how we can, re-roll with that theory on all time frames. Now, it's not always going to give us picture perfect scenarios. Likewise, when we had the previous daily swing range over here back in July, right, and we pull back up to this level, we had like this refined supply level in here, we had this much higher probable supply level here, right? It swept liquidity, it was the extreme of the flip reaction, it had inducement above it, and then we had this extreme zone here as well. So there were higher supply zones that had a lot more probability that you would expect price would have wanted to come up here first to form that swing lower high before going down, rather than literally just tapping into this kind of first range that had no inducement. It didn't sweep liquidity, right? All of the things we look for to increase the probability. This POI didn't have any of that really, other than it broke structure and it wasn't a premium. Okay, and that's why price came into it, and then it dumped. Right, we got the IBOS here, and it pretty much fell in one straight movement and got the low. So, just something to bear in mind. You can, stack as many confluences as you want on a POI, but we never know which one's actually going to be the move to cause it, right? We're always dealing with probabilities here. So just something to bear in mind. So if I can simplify things, how am I approaching this coming into the week ahead? I'm more than happy to look for shorts from both of these. And yeah, but it's only once, right? If like price literally comes straight into here and then we look for shorts, I will be very wary that price could just be reacting to come into demand to then continue a deeper pullback. And likewise, when we come into here, right, looking for those shorts, but it's only once we get that IBOS that we then have confirmation that we're actually going. So yeah, just something to bear in mind. Now, you can also just, bring your daily zone towards the pivot here, just if you want to be a little bit more, if you see price coming into here and then we start to get like an aggressive reaction and you get like a 4-hour chock or a 4-hour IBOS or whatever, right, you can, use some nuance that, okay, maybe we're going to miss this level and we're ready to go now, just like we did back here where we didn't quite come into the refined level, okay, and we came down. So yeah, just something to bear in mind there. But that's the daily chart. So let's take a look at the 4-hour chart. Okay, so believe. Okay, cool. So these big boxes here I've got drawn on, there are daily zones, right? Let's just kind of forget about supply and demand for a minute and just concentrate on 4-hour structure. So we had that 4-hour pullback, we had that break of structure, we then had the swing pullback here, and then last week it tried a couple of times, but eventually we got, let's get rid of this. Eventually we got that 4-hour bearish break of structure over here. Let's just take a look at that for a minute. Okay, because you can see this was the swing low, and on first attempt price tried to break and close below, but it failed to do so. So we didn't have a confirmed boss at that point, so this was not the swing high, but eventually then we did get that break and close, which then means this becomes our swing high, right? Because that's the highest point after the swing low was formed that went on to break the low. Okay, but remember, as I was saying last week during the trade recaps and session recaps, that although technically we did have a boss, right, and I am being mechanical and this does become our new swing high, right, all of that is true, you have to learn how to interpret the price action of how it happened. Because when we then actually got that boss over here, see how if you look at the most recent low here, it failed to close below here. So you're starting to see, right, bulls stepping in here, trying to push price up and not let it close below that low. And again, price comes down to this recent low, another sweep, right? Price fails to close below. And that's why I was saying there's a pretty good chance now that we're probably likely to switch bullish here, especially when you consider when we got that initial daily breaker structure over here, what happened? It stopped dead in its tracks, price pulled back straight away. Right, again, tried to break and close below, failed, broke and closed below this low, but it failed to break below the most recent low. Right, that's a very, very good indication that, you know, the bears are running out of steam here, that demand's starting to overpower supply here. And then once we got this most recent supply zone fail, right, when all of this chain failed, we got structure shifting bullish, the internal structure shifting bullish here. That was a very good signal now that potentially this swing high was going to go, which is then eventually what happened. Okay. I'm just going to delete this for a minute just to keep our charts nice and clear. So we do have the 4-hour chart switching bullish now. Okay, so this would be our swing low. I won't mark that out as my swing high just yet, just because I want to see a bit more of a sustained pullback. Like if we initially open up on Monday and went straight up straight away, I wouldn't classify that as a 4-hour swing pullback, right? I want to see a bit more of a sustained 4-hour pullback. Then I'll be happy to kind of classify that as my 4-hour swing high. But for all intents and purposes, right, this is the current bullish swing range that we are trading within. So what do we expect after a 4-hour breaker structure? We expect a 4-hour pullback, which we're starting to potentially get already. So basically, the most simple idea for the week ahead is to look for price to come into some levels of demand to try and catch that 4-hour higher low with a sort of decent first target of that 4-hour swing high. Okay, but you have to remember, right? Why has the 4-hour switched bullish? What is the expectation? Well, the expectation is the 4-hour has switched bullish just to facilitate that daily pullback. So as we start to come into these daily levels of supply, we have to be wary, right? That now that could be, the 4-hour objective is complete. We've had the daily pullback now, and maybe the 4-hour will be ready to switch bearish. Okay. So as we come into these levels, I'll be looking for shorts, but I'll also be aware that the 4-hour is not aligned with the daily chart because the 4-hour is now bullish. This would then be a 4-hour strong swing low, and I will also be open to looking for longs to then push price up higher to more premium levels of supply. And again, look for the shorts from within here. But if the 4-hour remains bullish, we can then also look for longs against daily demand, against the daily bearish structure, because potentially we may switch bullish. So when you have the 4-hour and the daily misaligned, that's just something you have to bear in mind, right? I'm going to continue to look for longs up into these supply zones. Again, I'll look for shorts, but if the 4-hour stays bullish coming into these strong lows, I'll also be happy to look for longs and likewise, right? So it's just about being able to kind of, be able to hold conflicting biases in your mind and just manage your expectations of how far price is likely to go. So let's kind of concentrate on the swing range, and then we'll look at those other areas. So what do we have within the swing range we've got? Well, obviously we have the extreme, which in theory, like I always say, should be the highest probability because this has to hold if the 4-hour chart is going to remain bullish, right? Because it's right at the strong 4-hour low. Obviously it has some nice inducement as well with this 4-hour POI here. Which swept liquidity. So we've kind of got two zones here. So I'll draw it on. So this low obviously can act as inducement for your extreme POI down here. Now, does this hit the range? Let's see. Oops. Oh, it just misses that range. So there is potential, right? Price may want to come down to this low. I think it's unlikely just by the way that this POI formed. You can see here, right? Let's talk through this now for a second. Price obviously came into this wick supply, had a fairly decent reaction, right? Pretty strong reaction to the downside. That supply failed to put in a lower low. Demand has then stepped in and overpowered supply. So when we get the break and close above that reaction, right? Anywhere from the high of the reaction to the base of the reaction, anywhere between those two orange lines is where your supply flipped to demand, right? But obviously we can refine that reaction a little bit down into this zone, which is even still a pretty big zone, right? So some of you may even want to refine it to the wick if you really want to, but I'm happy to keep it like this, okay? So we have a flip zone that swept liquidity and led to a breaker structure. So for me, this is a very, very strong zone, right? You can see how it formed, right? Boom, right? That is a very clear zone. So, we can never assume, but I would say there's a pretty damn high probability that this is going to be the level that will hold if this is going to continue bullish and take out this high. So there is some possibility we could come down to this extreme and this could be used for inducement, but because this flipped, because it swept liquidity, I think there's a decent chance this can hold. The only thing this doesn't have is it doesn't have any structural inducement in the leg, right? That's probably the one tick in the box against this POI holding and potentially why we may come down to this extreme, okay? But both of those POIs are very, very pretty decent. And I'd be more than happy to look for longs to at least target this week for a high with the potential that we could go up higher, right, so far and beyond. So that's pretty simple. In terms of areas where we could look for either playing the 4-hour pullback, right, or potentially looking for where that daily swing lower high may form, we can look at refining those two daily supply zones down to the 4H, right? So we've got this nice 4-hour doji here, which again, some of you may want to just include both of those. That's typically what I would do, right? I would prefer price to push when it comes into here, to push deeper into the refined pivot zone. But if we start to kind of come into here, right, and we get like a M15 IBOS or bearish boss or 4-hour chalk or anything significant, and we haven't quite met this level, obviously you want to look left and go, does it make sense? Okay, yes, we can clearly see this small 4-hour range here. Okay, I'm happy to get involved now because potentially price may not want to come up and actually mitigate the distal of that refined pivot zone, right? And that's where you can use a little bit of nuance there. That's a pretty decent zone. We do also have this level here, which obviously isn't stacked with the daily chart, so potentially not as high probability. It flipped this range, okay, so that is valid, right? And yeah, you may want to again, just if price comes up here, taps like the distal of this flip zone and starts to give us like strong structural signals, like you get like a strong 4-hour IBOS or 4-hour chalk, then okay, you maybe want to take it, right, rather than waiting for the exact refined level to be hit. So again, just something to bear in mind. And then if we look at the extreme 4 hours, daily supply, we do have this 4-hour wick, right? Because you could draw it on the distal, but you see how it's kind of already been tapped into a couple of times. So you may want to refine it to that wick. It's not looking too great up here. Let's kind of zoom in a little bit. It's all quite corrective. It's not great. We have this buy to sell here, which is decent, so I'd be looking at that. Now this is something I'm starting to try and collect a lot more data on and figure out, but you see how when the supply zone was created, right, where we had the close below, at this point this is a valid zone in terms of supply. Obviously it's not strong yet because it hasn't broken any structure or flipped demand, but that's how you draw it. But after price created that supply, you see how it came back in and it filled up some of those orders. I mean, there will be some left in this zone, but it's filled up a decent amount, and then it led to the move that flipped this demand level. And broke obviously this low and beyond. So this is something I'm trying to look at. Can you be super accurate now and refine it to the next unrefined level and look at this level here, these buy to sell wicks, or you could even just put it on that whole candle, right? And that's something I'm trying to test and see. So that could be something you could do, or you may want to refine it to those wicks there. But this is the thing, right? When you've got kind of quite large zones, this is where you don't have to worry. Like you can look on the M15, or what I would advise most of you do is just wait for that M15 chalk, right? Or even IBOS. Wait for that chalk, let it confirm the level, let it give you a fresh M15 supply level, right? And then you can start to look to play those shorts there. So, you don't have to try and overguess exactly where price is going to react from. So let's kind of just rein these in a little bit. Bring this in, cool. Got this level here. And there we go. Okay, so now we kind of got all of those POIs drawn out. I kind of just want to go over quickly some structural expectations. So the 4-hour chart has switched bullish, but remember, are we just expecting this to be a long-term 4-hour trend now? Potentially, but that might happen, but we can't expect that because for now the daily chart is bearish. So the expectation is that the 4-hour chart has switched bullish simply to facilitate that daily pullback, right? So as we start to come into these larger boxes, which is our daily supply zones, we have to start thinking in our minds that now there's a potential that daily swing lower high could form, right? So that means if that happens, the 4-hour chart could switch bearish, right? We could come into daily supply, and if we break this low, okay, and then we would have confirmation that the 4-hour chart's bearish, right? And then we're looking to take out this low. However, don't know how that happened. However, what I would be doing, right, is I'll be looking for longs in from these demands to target this high. Then as we come into here, I'm looking for shorts, but I'm going to take the majority of my profits as we come down into this strong 4-hour low, right? I'm not bothered about trying to catch the move that comes all the way down here, or if you want to do that, leave just a little bit of volume. Because what can happen is price can come into this 4-hour strong low. Then again, I'm happy to look for longs to target this weak high. And as we come up into here, again, we can look for shorts, but it may just be to target this low and beyond, right? So you need to wait for true structure alignment before you can kind of hold on to your profits. And what I mean by that is we come into here, all right, we come into this extreme zone, you can get short, but it's once we get this move and we break this low, we get the 4-hour shifting bearish, which would be your daily IBOS most likely, then we come into here, okay, now if you take shorts, you have everything aligned, so this is then when you can hold on with a lot more volume to target into here, because this is where we expect those 4-hour ranges to remain bearish until we take out this low, right? So it's all about understanding when you have structural alignment and when you don't. But that's getting a few chess pieces ahead. So what I would say, just to give you even more simple forecast for the next few days, is I'll be looking for longs from within here or from within here to essentially target this week 4-hour high. As we come into these levels of supply, I'm more than happy to look for shorts, but being aware that until we have that structural alignment, these shorts can just be reactions to facilitate pullbacks into these strong lows to then continue higher. Okay? And that's basically how we are doing things. So that's the 4H. And then last but not least, we have the old M15. Okay. So I'm just going to hide these 4-hour liquidity bits just from a little chart OCD. So yeah, coming in towards the end of the week, we had a bit of manipulation coming into the ECB on Thursday, right? We came to this high, we switched bearish, if you count that as a swing pullback, right? And then we switched bullish again. So now we have this as our M15 swing range. Whoops. So let me zoom in a little bit. So this for me is clearly a swing pullback on the M15. I would not classify this as significant enough of a pullback to be swing structure relative to recent price action, right? That's just internal structure. So after we had that M15 swing break of structure, what do we expect? We expect a swing pullback. What will confirm the start and end of the swing pullback? An IBOS, right? We want to see the internal break of structure. So not fractal structure, not chalk. We want to see that IBOS, okay? So as we come up, right, and then we had that internal pullback and a push up, yes, you can continue to look for longs because there's every possibility that that internal order flow could continue for a little bit. But you always have to be wary that after a swing break of structure, following that internal structure is possible, but it becomes lower probability because we're expecting that swing pullback to happen, okay? Also this zone, right, you see how it had no inducement in the leg, right? No structural liquidity. So, and it did sweep liquidity actually, so that would have been one tick in the box, but it's not too surprising, right? You have to accept that following this, after the swing breaks of structure is lower probability, okay? So we have now had that bearish M15 IBOS. So now that we have the internal structure shifting bearish, we now have true structural confirmation that that swing pullback is happening. Okay, obviously we can put on premium and discount as well, and we can see. I don't need to draw on. Roughly, this is going to be the discount that we're expecting price to pull back to. Now I'm just going to quickly go back on a 4-hour chart because annoyingly, our 4-hour zones have not appeared. I'm going to go back. Okay, cool. So just rain these in a little bit. Right. Okay, nice. Ooh. So let's just kind of talk about the M15 for a minute. So from a structural perspective, like I said, we have the internal structure shifting bearish to facilitate the swing pullback. So now this becomes it's a weak swing high, right? Because obviously it hasn't taken the swing low. This is our strong swing low. But from an internal structure perspective, this is now our strong internal high. So coming into the weekly market open, we may expect an internal pullback into the supply levels, and then we expect this internal structure to shift bearish until it comes into our strong levels. And then what we need to see to signal the end of this swing pullback is we need to see that bullish IBOS. Once we get that bullish IBOS, we now have true structural alignment on the M15 because the internal structure would now be bullish, realigning itself with the swing structure. So now what is the expectation? Now the expectation is these strong internal lows, these bullish ranges will hold until what? Until it takes out the weak swing high, right? And that's the expectation we work with. So if the M15 is going to switch bearish, if this swing structure is going to fail and we're going to switch bearish, then what would we expect? We would expect all of these lower highs to hold, right? So if price comes into here and holds, then that's what will have to happen if that's going to switch bearish, right? And that's basically how you can interpret the internal structure. So we can look to play those moves into these levels. So obviously we have some supply here. All right, that's basically more of a flip zone of the range, right? We obviously have this range demand here. Price comes into the range, reacts, fails to put on a higher high, pushes to the downside, and causes that bearish IBOS. We also have the extreme as well, which is unmitigated. So two levels that potentially price could pull back to at the start of the week. We have kind of mitigated this sort of decisional here. Not a great zone the price is kind of reacting off to, but I wouldn't overanalyze the most recent price action because a lot's going to change through Asia. Like we may even dump or we may pull back up. So wouldn't be looking to trade any of this and see what price action brings nearer to the Asia Open. This would be the unmitigated extreme. So this is probably the highest probable level I'd be looking at in terms of longs on the M15. Nested within the 4-hour chart. You can see here what happened after that initial break of structure over here, right? Price came into that supply. It reacted, failed to put in a lower low, and then price came into the upside, right? So I'll draw that one for you. All right, this is essentially your range supply that caused the break of that low. See how price came into supply, failed to put in a lower low, and then moved to the upside. So technically anywhere from that top of that reaction to the bottom of the reaction, that is your supply to demand flip range, right? So some of you may want to have that on, but for the majority of you, I'd recommend always looking to trade from pivot zones, especially when the range is so big. So the way that I interpret like a range like this is I'm aware of it. I probably wouldn't even bother drawing it on my charts just because obviously we have the 4-hour demand as well. But as price comes into here, right? And I'm looking, ideally I want to see price come into here, but if I start to see like, a clear shift, at minimum, I need to see a bullish M15 chock really, ideally, because that will give us then a fresh M15 zone. But ideally we get something like this, right, where we get that sort of larger internal structure, maybe price comes into here and then gives us like that bullish IBOS. Okay, now I can look left, I understand what we're coming off. Obviously we're in 4 hour demand as well, and then that's a much higher probable level to look for longs from. But ideally, right, price comes into here. As soon as price comes into here, I personally will be happy to look for my M1 entry model because it's pro 4 hour trend, pro M15 trend, near the strong low. It's a flip zone, it's a refined pivot zone. Like, it ticks all the boxes for me to look for my M1 entry model pretty much straight away there. But if we react from here on the M1, I'd want to see an M15 chock at a minimum. Okay, but remember, if you have, right, the internal structure like this, I'm trying to think how to draw this right, and then we come into here, or I should say actually here, right, we come into this range. Let me redraw this 1 second. So a scenario where we come down, right, we have larger bearish internal structure like this, right, and then we come into this range, and then we have a bullish chock like here on the M15. Okay, at this point we have a bullish change of character. Do I want to get long? Well, it will depend on what the internal structure looks like, because if price comes up into here and is rejecting this strong internal high, and then I'm looking to buy from this demand that caused the chock, well, you're now buying from a weak internal low because it's failed to take out the internal high. So I don't want to buy from this low, right? It's much lower probability. It could play out, but it's lower probability because why did price have a bullish M15 chock? It had a bullish M15 chock to facilitate the pullback into that strong high. Now you're trying to buy from a weak low. Not good to do so, right? Could play out, but I would rather wait in this instance for that to happen, get the IBOS, okay, now I want to get long, right? That's the scenario in which I would do that. The other way in which you can do it is if you get the internal structure coming in, right, and then you get the bullish chock right here, but the internal structure is still bearish, that's fine because I can get in long here, right, to play that pullback, and I can remove my risk now. So if this high holds and we come down, fine, I've taken profits or removed my risk, right? Or I can be in the trade and it's shifted bullish. So it's all about the risk to reward. How does price action look like, whether you want to wait for the IBOS or whether you're happy to just wait for that M15 chock, right? Because I do get that question a lot of when to wait for it and when not, and it all depends on how price action looks, right? Do you have the risk to reward for it to happen? One other thing I'll say is, yes, there is demand here, and it did flip the actual refined pivot of that level. But for me, this is just way too corrective. Like this price action, it's more kind of just of a pause in price action. It's during the daily rollover when there's almost no volume. It's kind of just one movement here. It's way too corrective. I just see this as inducement for below, right? So I wouldn't personally be looking to take any entries off these levels. What I'd be waiting for is the price to come in and show some strong bullish signs from here, right? Structure shifting to give me fresh demand to trade from. Okay, so start the week we can look for shorts from within here to play that pullback, but obviously be wary this is a weak swing high. Ideally to look in from here, and then we can start to look for longs to then target this high here. One thing I will add is obviously this is the 4 hour range, right? This is the 4 hour low, and that'll be the 4 hour high. So we could switch bearish on the M15 just to come into these levels from within here, just to mitigate that 4 hour extreme and then continue bullish. But I do think that's unlikely, right? I think that's what I was saying on the 4 hour chart. The way this formed, right? Sweep of liquidity, swept all of this sell side liquidity, strong move to the upside. I'd be surprised if we're going to stay bullish and if we're going to have that deeper daily pullback. I'd be surprised if this fails, but always have to expect the unexpected, right? Anything can happen. So yeah, super quick recap. Daily chart, expecting a bit more of a swing pullback. Obviously, there is some potential that we could have that deeper weekly and monthly move, but I'm not going to assume that happens until we get that break and close above. So for now, just keep it simple. Run with the assumption that the daily swing structure is going to stay bearish, right? And we're going to get that movement. So looking for that lower high to form from within here or here. This obviously being the higher probable zone. So if we get reaction from within here, I'll look for shorts, but it could just be to facilitate a pullback into this level and to continue to get that bullish internal structure, right? Similar on the 4 hour chart, I have it mapped as bullish. So happy to look for longs from within here. But remember, why has the 4 hour shifted bullish? For now, we can only expect it shifted bullish to facilitate that daily pullback, right, up into these levels. So I'll look for shorts from within here with the possibility we could form that swing lower high. But I'll be, managing pretty aggressively and probably have the majority of my profits banked before we come into the strong low. And I'll still be happy to look for longs from within here if this low holds to, again, target that high, so on and so forth, right? Reactions from these levels. Again, look for shorts from within here with the possibility that daily lower high could form. But just being wary, we don't have confirmation of that until the 4 hour shifts bearish. And then we can look for these movements here into these levels, right? And that's basically it. So yeah, coming into Monday, definitely looking for some longs from within here and potentially here to at least target this week high, and then looking for shorts from these levels, right? And that's basically it. And then the M15, Yeah, nice clear swing structure, looking for longs from within these levels, ideally this refined pivot, to want to target this level here. But obviously, if it stays bearish, the internal structure, then it stays bearish. Potentially we could be coming into here, or potentially the daily just maybe taking over, right? And we could take out that low. There's always that possibility because we are heavily bearish in the higher time frames. But with the 4 hour and the M15 both being bullish, more than happy to look for longs, potentially shorts into the longs, right? Coming to this level, and if we hit this refined level, I'm happy to look for an M1 entry model. If it looks decent, obviously if it's selling off super aggressively and you just get like one little M1 shock, you may want to wait for a little bit more, right? Wait for something super clear on the M1, or just be patient, all right? And wait for a bullish M15 change of character, or even wait for the IBOS, right? It depends on how it looks. Okay, guys, have a great week, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers, guys.